to welcome you to our program today, and our very special guest is Tony Gael. Tony, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
And our subject today is has to do with chronic illness. And this is certainly a topic that is of concern for all of us. You know, if we're not dealing with chronic illness ourselves, we certainly have people who are close to us, whether it be family members and friends, who do struggle with chronic illness. And so this is not an easy topic in how it relates to our faith, but we're thankful to have a person like Tony who's got a strong faith, but who also suffers from chronic illness. And I know that his message today is going to be of strength for all of us. And so, Tony, I appreciate your willingness and your courage to be able to talk about a very difficult topic this day, and this has to do with chronic illness. And I don't know, Tony, if you just want to share a little bit about about your life, about your faith. I know you're a very well-educated man, but then also as far as chronic illness, how long you've suffered with chronic illness.
Okay. Well, my story with chronic illness began about 14 years ago, I think, when my body just started to do things that is not normal. I couldn't walk for a while. In fact, the symptoms that I had could be mistaken as I actually had a stroke. That's kind of what it looked like. And it took several years, and if anybody in your audience has multiple sclerosis or knows somebody intimately with multiple sclerosis, will tell you that it can be years from the onset of a couple of symptoms to actually being diagnosed. I was diagnosed as having it 4 years ago, I think, and since then I have regular appointments with my neurologist, which she's the best doctor ever. I'll just tell you that. It's a blessing, a huge blessing to have somebody in the medical profession.
Somebody who understands this and who can really help treat it. So, in other words, what you're saying is that 4 years ago, you were diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, MS, but you really had a sense that this is something that was coming on. You weren't feeling right for some time, like maybe anywhere from 8 to 10 years prior to the diagnosis, that you knew that there was something wrong, but did you just kind of do a lot of doctoring at that point, trying to figure out just, what is wrong? And then finally, after so much time, then they were able to really say that this is what that is.
Yeah, it was frustrating. The two tools that they use, neurologists use in diagnosing MS, is either MRI scans of your brain, and they do a spinal tap to see if there's any abnormalities in your fluid, spinal fluid. Mine was diagnosed because they had taken an MRI of my brain at a different point in time in my life. So I did this newer one. They compared the two, and it was not just that I had it, but it had progressed. So those are the two diagnostic tests that they do. And it's a frustrating time, very frustrating. Not a whole lot is known about MS. They really don't know what brings it on. There is no cure for it. It's managed, which I do through exercise and with some medicine that I take that helps me keep on keeping on.
Yeah. But to hear that, your doctor say to you, Tony, you've got MS, multiple sclerosis. I mean, to hear something like that, I mean, even though he's saying, well, obviously I haven't been feeling well for a while, and I know that there's got to be something wrong, but to actually hear that, right away, being a strong, Christian that you are, a believer, and I think it's just natural that whenever anything happens, when trouble comes to our lives, that we ask that big question of why.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When the onset of my symptoms several years ago, we knew then that the odds of me being a pastor again were slim. And it's not to be negative with the church, but I think the church could do more reaching out. I would love to see churches actually have somebody on staff that is disabled in some way. I think that there needs to be more ministries to people with chronic illness, and not just with the chronic illness people, but for those that take care of the chronically ill. They are a lot of times forgotten in this whole thing, and they take on these Herculean type burdens, and sometimes they just need to be taken care of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so what you're saying is that you were a pastor, primarily working with youth as a youth minister, which how blessed we are to have people who are youth pastors and
who are crazy enough to be youth pastors.
Crazy enough to be youth pastors. Yeah, but yet kind of having the sense that when you get diagnosed with a chronic illness, whatever it may be, that all of a sudden now there's kind of, do I want to use the word stigma that's with that? Or meaning that sometimes now, even in the church, to say, well, how capable are you now to be able to minister? And that there's something wrong about that.
Yes. I was actually in a different state, but somebody had nominated me to be an elder. And basically it came down to physically I wasn't going to be able to do it, which I just started to cry because I knew then that the odds of me really being in ministry, full force kind of ministry, was over. And the church has done a lot of good things, especially with mental illness. But I think for me, being a man with a chronic illness, people kind of look at you as, are they really, sick? Are they just trying to get out of not working? I was talking to you before the show that, a lot of people will use 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, that Paul says that if you do not work, you will not eat. And that is a passage that's taken wildly out of context. He's talking about something totally different. But when you look at the life of Jesus in the 3 years of his ministry, the amount of people that either he found or people found him who had some kind of chronic illness, whether it be blindness, whether it be being paralyzed, demon-possessed, the woman, 12 years with her bleeding situation. He met all of them with compassion, and he cured them. He did not tell them that you should not eat because you're not working. He understood the human condition and how the human body could break down. In fact, I think he had a special affinity for those that were sick. Because we're all sick. I mean, that's what sin does to us. It's just, for some of us, it's more obvious that we're broken. In fact is, maybe I'll get to this a little bit, but I've considered it a blessing. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it's disheartening. There will be days that aren't very good days. There'll be days that, I'm pretty decent. But knowing that I can't go any place without walking with my cane, that's usually a pretty good tip that something's not quite right with me. And that can be frustrating. Actually, there's times when it can be rather humiliating. Because you get used to the people who are kind of like, what's up with him? And it's like, I just don't want to go there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who try to help, and God bless them with, diets and stuff like that. I've had a lot of people come to me and ask me about my symptoms and stuff like that. And God bless them because they're important people in my life. But I think that there are those who try to easily, or yeah, try to easily take away from what chronic illness is, then you're devaluing that person too.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know, as far as being a child of God, is that God has given you that value, that you are a child of God. Your faith has made you well, and you've got your faith, you've got your intelligence, you've got your person, and just because you've got a chronic illness doesn't mean that you are any less able to serve. If anything, now God is working in you, strengthening you, and making, you know, what would be considered to be, you know, your chronic illness to be now maybe your strength to be able to now minister in ways that otherwise you wouldn't have been able to.
You know, with Jesus healing the people that he did, brought credibility to who he was. He's the healer, and he healed. Paul and the disciples, they healed. They brought credibility to the Christian message through healing people. And there's a place for that, but there's also a place of gentle recognition that this person is either sick with MS, or like my dad had Parkinson's and Parkinson's-related dementia before he passed a couple of years ago. And there's just, I love Jesus. Maybe that's obvious, but partly why I love him so much is the compassionate heart that he had for people who are chronically ill.
Yeah. So as we, you know, think about the why question, I mean, that's just natural when something happens. You say, ask why. Not that we necessarily get an answer, but it's kind of our way to reach out, or if nothing else, just to vent some feelings that we are experiencing. But we can deal with the why so long and start to maybe get more into the how question of, well, how does God work in my life right now? Or what is God doing to either bring healing or some strength to me? And so that, you know, is always helpful if we can start seeing kind of the how of how God works through this. And you've already mentioned some things as we, you know, look in the Bible, as we study the Bible. I mean, Jesus is always meeting people compassionately who are suffering with just a variety of things. And when you think about humanity, I mean, there's so many different things that we can suffer from. It's amazing that we, you know, that we live 5 years, kind of a thing, with all the things that we can get. But yeah, you've been mentioning, you were talking a little bit about, well, this is how God has been working, that as you can see the scriptures, but you know that God does, that you see God as, well, I guess that's a big step, is that you see God as being, you know, not this one who's brought this affliction upon you, but rather that God is loving and caring and compassionate. And so I guess that a lot of it just has to do with our attitude towards God, because I do hear a lot of people say that, I mean, they almost equate God to be like the devil, that, you know, God has done this to me.
Yeah.
And it's just like, wow, if God has done this to me, you know, he's a very wicked guy, kind of a thing. I mean, who would do something like this to me? But yeah, but obviously your understanding of God is one of, that God is loving and compassionate. But share a little bit more, obviously, as you've been in this journey. How has your faith helped you?
It's difficult. You go through the stages of mourning because of something that's happened to you that is going to change the rest of your life, and not for the better. Once you're diagnosed with a chronic illness, it's pretty much downhill. For me, there have been times when I have been very angry at God. This is not part of my plan. You know, when I graduated from seminary, this was not part of the plan at all. No. And so there have been times when I've been really angry at God. But I also love God because that's okay. He understands anger and disappointment. And he compassionately, you know, for me, I get the feeling sometimes that I'm just sitting next to him on a bench and we're both crying together, because he knows the breakdown of a body is not what he originally created. He did not create us to be chronically ill or to have cancer or to have a mental illness. He created us to be whole human beings. So then you get the question that he created us to be whole human being, and none of us are. Fact is, I would say that there are three really big blessings of being chronically ill and as a Christian. I'm going to refer to my cheat notes a little bit to help remember.
Yeah, go ahead.
But one of them is that we've got a unique opportunity to be a witness because of our illness, because we are broken. I see this a lot where the church that I volunteer and I work with the senior high group. And, you know, they've gotten a different view of what it looks like as a man who's got a chronic illness. And how does he deal with it? And for me, I know they're looking at me, which is great, because I think I'm able to explain to them what my chronic illness is and my place as far as where I'm at in my faith, whether or not that means sometimes that I get angry with God or sometimes that I just fall down flat on my face and love him, and every place in between. Kids need to know that, I think, especially. Fact is, we've got one young man who's having difficulties with his stomach, and he and I have been able to talk about chronic illness and how things have changed his life quite dramatically, and what do we do with God when something like that happens. The second blessing is in part because we are broken and we are in need of repair. Paul said that it was because of his thorn in the side that he was able to be a bigger witness to God's glory. And that doesn't make sense. If you're not a Christian, you're probably looked at as a fool to believe that, and yet Paul did. And Paul was able, though we don't know what that thorn was, I think that became really one of the biggest areas of witness for him. That I worship a God that I don't expect just good things from him. There are going to be hard times in my life, and how do I deal with that as people are looking at me through that. Another one is, I think chronically ill Christians are very excited about being in heaven. I mean, truly. We acknowledge the fact that we're sick, and there's really very few things that we can do about it. There are some, medically wise, through counseling wise, but there's really nothing we can do about it. So we go before God and say, okay, I'm broken. But one day, the second that I die, I'm going to be repaired. And C.S. Lewis, in his last book of the Chronicles of Narnia, wrote this about the kids being in heaven, and I just love it. He says, he shook his mane and sprang forward into a great gallop, a unicorn's gallop, which, in our world, would have carried him out of sight in a few moments. But now a most strange thing happened. Everyone else began to run, as if they found, to their astonishment, that they could keep up with him. The air flew in their faces as if we were driving fast in a car without a windscreen. Their country flew past as if they were seeing it from the windows of an express train. Faster and faster they raced. And here's the great, but no one got hot or tired or out of breath.
Oh, yeah.
I can't wait. I don't know if there's going to be unicorns in heaven, but I fully expect there to be horses in heaven. And I fully expect that we're going to be able to relate to animals like this. And I can't wait.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, he's given me such an opportunity that I have to be patient through this. But I can't wait.
And so when you think about the encouragement that you are to so many people, the example that you are showing of your faith, because a lot of times, people we watch, okay, this person now is a Christian, but now they've got this. How are they going to react? Some people just crumble almost immediately, like their faith, is like shattered glass. Whereas others, it's just the opposite. It's like, if anything, wow, they've just become stronger and they are ministering. And you mentioned like Paul and the thorn in his flesh, and that now has become his strength. And I see that as you are, now ministering, that that would be kind of we talked about the why, the how, but then the what. What is God going to do with this in me? Is that you're doing now quite a ministry, as you are an example and a witness to others. And so those are some, real special blessings that you have been able to, to see that your faith, which is more precious than gold, has been tested, and to where you obviously, I'm talking about what Peter writes in the first chapter of his book, his letter, 1 Peter. But anyway, Tony, I guess one of the things that I'm wondering about is that what can we do as individuals or as a church to be a better support? Now, I'm not trying to say that the church and people, that you don't have compassionate, merciful people who are doing a lot of great things, because we do have that. But what would you suggest to say this would really be helpful? If you had 1 to 5 things to say, if people, the church, could do this, that would really be of strength to people who are suffering from chronic illness, not just to those who are suffering from chronic illness, but also their families.
Right. The number 1 would be prayer. And don't pray as a quiet, private thing. Let us know that you're praying for us. That is a great encouragement. And for, like you said, for the chronically ill and for those that care for them. That would be a big one. Another one would be to have something set up that, depending on the illness that the person is having, to have someone come into the home and let their caregiver go out and see a movie, go out shopping, just to be able to breathe for a couple of hours.
Provide what we call, maybe the term is a respite.
Yep.
Okay, so so to be praying for a respite, because caretakers, and as a pastor of a church, or being a pastor, I've known where caretakers have worn themselves out to the point where they will actually beat their loved one to the grave, if that makes sense. I've seen that happen before.
Yeah.
Okay, so the respite, where they can just get out and, whether go to a movie or just breathe or get some shopping done that they need to. Okay, so those are 2 things. Anything else that you can see?
I know that in much of the rest of the world, they take Bible things seriously. And one of them is from James, where he talks about praying and anointing people with oil. And somehow in the Western world, I think we've gotten away from that. We try to explain everything scientifically or medically, and sometimes there is a spiritual problem that is existing as you go through the grief process. But I think to be anointed with oil is actually kind of a command that we should be doing. I've never experienced that, but I know it takes place, and it would be a wonderful thing to be able to experience that on that kind of a level.
Okay.
To have people that can provide maybe financially in some instances, especially when it comes to putting a loved one in a nursing home. which my dad was in, and my mom did get, I think she got some help from some people, but that would be another tangible.
It's a financial burden.
Yeah.
A
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of them that people aren't aware of, but people who are suffering from chronic illness and their families are oftentimes suffering a financial burden that people sometimes may or may not be aware of.
Yeah.
So looking after, providing for in those ways are very helpful as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just in the little time that we have, I know that you've got a brochure here, and it's One You Ministries, right?
Right. One unique you.
Yeah, One Unique You, and so this is part of your ministry that you do, and so I don't know if you just wanted to share just a little bit about how you are using this as how God is using you as an instrument of ministry right now, and some of the things that you do, like you get out and speak sometimes to churches, or why don't you share? Why don't you share what you do?
I love talking with people. I love sharing my story. I love hearing people's stories. And I think what that provides is an arena for both of those things to happen. I think that I gain great inspiration from other people's stories. So even if I'm speaking, somebody who'll come up, and tell me, at least part of their story is a wonderful thing that I really, really enjoy. But I firmly believe that each and every one of us was made in a loving way and an eternal way, totally unique to us. There's never been anybody like you.
So everybody's story is going
And
to be unique and special.
Yes, absolutely.
It's something where we can learn.
Yep. And we don't have the pressures of, because of our uniqueness, we approach God differently. Much like we approach people differently too, our families differently than from our friends. But just, I guess, to inspire people to grow in their faith, to be honest in their faith is most rewarding.
Yeah, well, Tony, obviously you are doing that. You are an inspiration to so many of us. And so, Tony, God bless you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on the program and sharing with us today. And I want to thank you for joining us this day as well.